Welcome and thank you all for watching our professional development session today titled Psychological Perspectives of Universal Design for Learning, Applications and Challenges. I know this is a topic that has seemed only more integral to my teaching and my colleagues' teaching in the last 12 months. So we're going to get started with some introductions and an overview of our presentation today. My name is Amy Governale. I have my colleagues here, Catherine O'Toole and Kezia Shirky. We are all part of the psychology department at North Park University and have all been using Universal Design for Learning in some capacity in our courses since we've received some training as part of our Teaching and Learning Cooperative. In our presentation today, we're going to go over the UDL basics. We'll talk about the applications and how we used these principles in our courses, and then we'll end with some considerations and challenges. So what is Universal Design for Learning and why should we care? Universal Design for Learning, or UDL as we'll call it, has evolved from the disability rights movement and states that by acknowledging students have different needs in our classroom and incorporating some flexibility and support for our students, not just those with the accommodations, but everyone, you can create learning environments in which all students have equal opportunities to succeed. Universal Design for Learning, therefore, really emphasizes the needs to have multiple modalities for students to access and engage with materials and to show what they know. This approach assumes that rather than trying to fit your community of learners into a one-size-fits-all box, by changing the design of your environment, rather than by trying to change your learners, you reduce those existing barriers so that all learners can engage in some rigorous and meaningful learning. And all this can happen without having to create individual accommodations every semester or even waiting for students to approach you with their needs. As we're going to discuss throughout our presentation, the UDL is a really great way to examine the stuck points of your classes, what's working and what's not working well, and to use these principles to help clarify issues that keep coming up and promote student success in your lectures, your modules, individual assessments, or even your whole curriculum. So why should we care? Well, as psychologists, we care about learning, both the neurological and cognitive processes that underlie learning. As professors, we care about our students, their mental well-being, their growth in their skills, and their holistic development. And then as psychology professors, we care about creating the best learning opportunities for our students. So we started incorporating these principles into our courses after reading Tobin and Belling's Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone as part of our Teaching and Learning Cooperative. And in this book, the authors really describe 3 goals of Universal Design for Learning. 1, to create interactions with learners so they don't have to ask for special treatment regardless of the types of barriers they face. This really goes back to that idea of accommodations and whether or not students have documentation for their different accommodation or different needs. It can reach students across a wide ability and motivation spectrum. I know that personally this semester has seemed like I've seen that wide range of motivation, and UDL has really helped me reconsider or think about different ways of engaging my students and having them show what they learn in my class. And then it most importantly treats all learners as capable and valuable members of our class and not just, again, trying to fit everybody into a one-size-fits-all box. So what are our principles and strategies of UDL? We have this chart here, and we actually have included the PDF of the chart from the Center for Applied Special Technology, or what is now just called CAST. We encourage you to download it, pull it up as we do our presentation, and we'll refer to a lot of these strategies and principles throughout. So it's a really helpful tool just for this presentation and even for the future. And so what CAST has said is that the goals of UDL is to create learners who kind of have these core components along this bottom row here. Learners who are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal-directed. And the way to really help encourage learners to develop those skills is to apply some of these checkpoints within each of these 3 domains of learning networks. So we have providing multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. And so what each of these means is that our multiple means of engagement, this really relates to creating those effective or motivated learners. And so it's important to note that when we think about engagement in our classes, there's not a one strategy that's going to be optimal or the most engaging for all learners in all contexts. So providing those choices is really essential. I think, often think about engaging material as being very novel or spontaneous or involving a lot of sensory stimulation. And that can be really exciting for some students, but it could provoke a lot of anxiety in some others. So in order to really create that mastery motivation in our students, the desire, intrinsically to learn material for the sake of it, providing lots of options in autonomy, goal setting, and emotion regulation will hopefully help students become more purposeful and motivated. For our domain of representation, this is about providing multiple ways of presenting information to help learners become more knowledgeable. I think as professors, we often rely really heavily on auditory information or visual presentation, but again, that's not always accessible depending on certain contexts for each learner. The other key part of representation is helping to clarify meanings and make really explicit connections between concepts so that learners can learn how to pull out key pieces of information that as experts we can do pretty easily, but as a novice learner, you have more trouble doing. And then finally, with our multiple means of action and expression, this is helping learners become more strategic and goal differentiated by providing lots of options for learners to show what they know. This really helps to consider all of the physical, executive function, and language barriers that more and more students are facing or are demonstrating. And so the goal is to help learners be able to effectively plan for and monitor their progress on assessments, and then perform at their ability level and not feel constrained by the type of assessment. What's really nice about all of these different checkpoints and strategies is that it's not just providing choices for your students, but you as a professor. So you can pick as many or as few of these options that works well for your class without having to feel overwhelmed by trying to incorporate all of these processes. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the process of UDL before going into our applications.
All right, thank you, Amy. I'm here to talk a little bit about adopting that new framework. So my colleague Amy mentioned that we learned about this framework for learning and a professional development opportunity we had. And admittedly, when we first learned about it, we were all a little bit overwhelmed. And we know adopting a new framework can always be challenging. So I'm going to talk about Nelson's model. Nelson suggests that we follow a few steps when thinking about adopting this new framework in our classroom. And ultimately, we want to start small. So my colleague Amy mentioned the first part is identifying what that stuck point is. And so the first thing that we want to do is reflect on what are the needs of my learners? What is that stuck point? So for me, for example, I think about application of course concepts, right? As psychologists and psychology teachers, we frequently want our students to apply material. And you may notice that that application might be shallow or students are just not quite getting there. So that's that stuck point. So then what you want to do is identify a principle or checkpoint that can addresses that need, right? How might I use that checkpoint or principle? So at this point, I'll reference you back to that CAST schematic in the comments side. And think about a checkpoint that might meet the needs of your learners. So if you notice that your learners are struggling with the application, perhaps you want to be more intentional about recruiting their interest. So optimizing the relevance, value, or authenticity of a project. So instead of telling learners, to just apply the information, change how you frame that assignment. So in other words, you'll investigate or create a new method or strategy. So this example involves changing an assignment, right? So the current project might have a very vague prompt that says, apply course concepts to something in the real world, and then write about it here using 250 words. So take a step back and think about, how might I make this more relevant, right? You could ask them instead to solve a novel and real world problem, and then do so perhaps by writing a letter to a congressperson or creating a podcast, right? Doing those things optimizes the relevance, value, and authenticity of the project. And then, of course, you're going to teach using that new strategy or apply that new strategy, right? So incorporating that into the classroom or assignment. And then ultimately, you're going to assess what you do, right? So take a look what they did. Listen to their podcast, read that letter to the congressperson, and examine the depth of application. So in this way, you're starting very small, right? You're picking one thing to change, and you're going from there. And so my colleague, Kezia, noticed that this makes a spiral, right? So we start small, but then we might continue to make changes to our class as the semester or semesters progress. So I mentioned, and my colleague Amy mentioned, that we participated in a professional development workshop on UDL. And so we've been applying these principles to our classroom for the past year now. And so we're going to talk about some of the ways that we do that. Hopefully it will give you a few ideas for your own courses.
Okay, so my name is Kezia Shirky, and I'm a clinical psychologist. So I'm going to talk to you about a specific assignment and how I used this process and made some modifications to it. So I have an assignment in my counseling psychology class where I ask students to pick a counseling profession and research it and give me information about what they find out. So typically this has been in a paper, and I would have them research all that information. I'm going to tell them what I want them to understand. So for instance, I want them to tell me a little bit about what the role of that professional is. Who do they serve? Who do they work with? What kind of training do you need? Do you need an advanced degree or just a bachelor's or a PhD? What is the salary that someone in that profession could expect? How much does it cost to get that level of education? What settings that person might be in? So is this like a one-on-one kind of counseling situation, more group? Is this in a hospital setting, inpatient, or outpatient? And then how does this information affect what you want to do? So a lot of the students, and the majority of students in this class, are interested in the counseling profession. So sometimes they come into that not really knowing the difference between, say, a social worker and a professional counselor and a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist. And sometimes they're a little bit limited even in understanding the breadth of what I might mean in there. So I'm going to give them some structures about what I mean by that. So I'm going to let them know that that could be a psychologist or a social worker or a chaplain or a child life specialist. I'm going to give them some of that structure. So this is an overview of the actual assignment, and let me now talk about how I apply UDL components to this. So one, I'm going to give them a lot of choice in the assignment. So I've given them, from the beginning, I gave them choice about kind of what counseling profession that might be, right? So that's going to help them to actually be interested in the assignment, to recruit their interest. So here I am using those the numbers that you'll see in that PDF that Amy and Kate responded or alluded to. So make sure if you want to pull that up and see that. So 7.1 is recruiting interest. 7.2 is that optimizing relevance. And again, here I'm just trying to increase their motivation. This is an assignment. They might not want to do it. Ooh, but this is actually something I need to know because I want to know what I have to do if this is a profession I'm interested in. And then I'm gonna give them some background knowledge, right? So again, as an expert, I can come up with all sorts of different things that I mean by counselors, but for them, that might actually be very confusing. So I'm gonna give them some of that. I'm gonna pull out some resources of where they might find that information. So some of the professional organizations or the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, so that they can see how popular that profession is, whether it's growing. And again, give them some of that structure to help them know how to find those the right information, the relevant information. And then I'm going to give them choice in their output. So this was definitely new after my learning about UDL principles. I had always had them write a paper because, you know, that's what you do. And I really realized I didn't care about the writing so much in this assignment. That wasn't an important part of this assignment. Certainly I have other assignments where research paper, that structure is really important for the actual learning I want them to have. But for this, I wanted them to learn about the field and reflect on what that meant to them. So I realized they could do all sorts of different things. So they could do blog posts or, you know, video presentations, or they could write a traditional paper. So I had been doing the paper out of convention rather out of this is an intentional, important part of the assignment. So I gave them that choice. I gave them choice about what counseling profession it was. And then I gave them the same rubric regardless. So I still have communication and clarity, but that's going to be expressed in different ways, right? Whether that is in a written form or more audio. So the first year, I think my students, it was all new. This was the first semester after any of us had done this. They all chose a paper. I think that was also comfortable for them. And then this year, actually slightly more than half chose the alternative method, which was kind of surprising to me. But I think that that speaks to maybe their comfort in seeing that as an option in other classes too, as our department has engaged in this UDL process. So that's about one specific assignment. I'm going to now talk about just, I think one of the things I've really taken away from this is just trying to offer choice and recruit that interest for our students. I realized that, you know, when I'm planning a syllabus, I always got to the point where I was like, ooh, but I want to have that chapter and this is important, right? And I didn't know what to pull out. And then all of a sudden it struck me. I'd been thinking about just, you know, power and all sorts of things like that in larger senses. Why am I making this choice, right? Like, why don't I let my students who are actually taking this class for the first and only time, I get to teach it all the time, why don't I let them make that choice? And so I, in my upper level classes, have them actually make the choice of what they want to do as a class. So that also allows them to have that kind of fostering collaboration and community, which is that 8.3. Sometimes there's discussion out loud in the areas that are most interesting to them at the beginning of class, and then they'll all rate what they actually want individually. It also allows, typically everyone gets, I've got about 2 class periods. They tend to be the last 2. So maybe 2 weeks or a week and a half that are on what they want. And sometimes people will put something else out there that maybe I hadn't thought of as one of the options. I'll say it's pretty low work for me. I now have prepped, you know, several kind of extra things, but typically it's about every 2 years of teaching a class that they're like, ooh, we want to do this thing that I haven't prepped before. And that also just helps keep teaching exciting for me and relevant to learn new things. So yeah, so they've got about those 1 to 2 weeks, and it used to be more salient. It used to be a way for them to practice submitting to Canvas, which is how I had my students submit papers, but not how a lot of people had prior to the pandemic. Probably less relevant now that gives them that practice, but it certainly was part of it before, that it was a really low stakes, hey, here's how you submit a paper, just with their choices written on it. And then in GE classes, I allow them some extra choice by like, here's a chapter, pick whatever chapter in this book. We're not covering tons of them. Which one is interesting to you, and write extra credit on that. So that's another way that I've offered choice. And then one last way that I've applied UDL in my classroom that I want to talk about is just really trying to think about an activity and increase accessibility. And this might be accessibility in terms of physical mobility. This might be in terms of socio-emotional or academic. Just we want to think of our activities and think about maybe who are our students, right, that might have restrictions in different ways, and decrease those restrictions as much as possible, especially like we're not always going to know everyone's restrictions, but ones that we might be aware of. So an example of this is I teach a class called Stress and Health. It's a general education class, and I have them do an activity called Just Like Me. It's a meditation activity that's made to kind of increase awareness of the shared humanity that we all have. So this seems particularly salient in this experience. And my typical that I just never really thought, much about was that we stand across from each other. And I had thought about the distance and that some people are more comfortable closer or further away than others. But it had just been easier for us to all just kind of get up and stand across the way and have a partner, and they each look into someone else's eyes, and then I read a script, a standard script. You can Google Just Like Me and find that. And then I had a student who had mobility issues that I knew about, right? Sometimes we don't actually know about all of these issues, but this one was salient and visible to me. And I thought from the beginning, okay, we're just going to make a change and no one's even going to know that it's not how I normally do it, right? It is how I now do it going forward. But I have everyone just pull a chair or bring out a chair and come so that they're all sitting across from each other. And it took maybe 20 more seconds of class time. And then that way everyone was able to participate on equal footing. I also realized that there's a wide variety of responses to eye contact. So some of those are vary by culture or by personal comfort. I happen to also have a student who identified as being on the autism spectrum disorder, and he had let me know about that at the beginning of the semester. So I wanted to make sure that I was allowing the class participants to all anticipate just a variety of human reactions that people might have to decrease any stigma that we might attribute to certain reactions. And so I talked about how eye contact can be more comfortable or less comfortable for different people. And that we might anticipate that for some people, we need to shift our eye gaze away for a while. And that's okay. You might close your eyes for a second and lift back up. I gave some strategies of looking at the bridge of a nose rather than right at the eyes if that was more comfortable. And that students might anticipate other people are laughing. But again, that's not because they're actually not taking it seriously, but just that that's part of a human natural experience that some people have in response to sustained eye contact. So again, just trying to increase that accessibility. And then, so that's ways that I've incorporated that in my class. And then I'm gonna hand it off here.
Great, thank you. So one of the reasons that I really liked UDL and the reason when I learned about it that really kind of got me on board was this idea that you could create these resources that will initially take some time, as like Kezia mentioned, or you might have to do a little bit of prep beforehand, but then will save you time semester to semester, right? That it will end up being more efficient for you because you're not constantly creating these individual accommodations or spending extra time answering the same questions over and over again. And so one of the ways, a really small way that I incorporated UDL into my classes that just ended up being so successful, I do it for all of my classes now, is I started creating online video instructions for my assignments. So before learning about UDL, I gave assignments. I assigned all my classes, the assignments pretty much a standard way. At the beginning of the semester, we would go through the syllabus, talk about major assignments coming up. You would have the instructions in the syllabus. You would have the instructions posted on our Canvas. And then as the deadlines came up, I would, give a reminder in class, tell people to go look at the instructions, email me with any questions. And even with those two modalities, talking about it in class and having the written instructions, I would still get the same questions or the same feedback that students didn't know what was expected of them, or they didn't understand the instructions, or that one that I think everybody kind of dreads, the let me see, can I have an example assignment, right? And you get worried that if you just pass out an example assignment that you're going to have students who just use that template and aren't using those critical thinking skills. So what I found is that by creating these online instructions, it's really increased accessibility and has been able to kind of make students feel more comfortable with my assignment instructions and given them lots of opportunities to practice. So So this is how my assignments typically used to be posted, or still posted in on Canvas, where I have instructions and due dates. I would have kind of very, elaborate ideas of what I'm looking for, the requirements. I include a rubric of the criteria I'm looking for, and I still would just get all of these questions. And so what I've done since then is I've created these video instructions, and I'm going to play a small clip of one. This is from the assignment I was just showing you on the previous slide from my research methods class, an assignment that was all about creating a survey. And this is a really important topic because it's a feeder assignment into a larger correlation paper. So students have to create their own self-report variables that they then will actually go out and collect data on to correlate two variables together. And it was really one of those stuck points of my classes. It was a place that students, no matter how often we would talk about it in class or how many times I would kind of direct them to these instructions, I would just get kind of half finished or really out there surveys, whether it was just students were unfamiliar with the topic or not sure how to even measure a variable in general. I just felt like it was an area that was a really important assignment, but students were having trouble with. And so what I really like, the first part of this video, which I won't show you, I'm pretty much verbatim reading my instructions. I'm not really deviating at all from what students already can read on their own, but maybe just hearing somebody else learning from a video, students are more comfortable with that. But what I like about this video is that the clip I'll show from you is I can actually pull up a previous student's assignment and talk through what this student did well and how they exemplify the assignment criteria. And now that way I'm not just handing out a template to say, do this or use this for your own assignment, but rather, here's why this student did well. Here's what this student is doing that meets the criteria well. So I'm going to mute my video and play a very brief clip from this. So what I have pulled up is an example of a survey that a student had turned into me in a previous semester. I just want to walk through, in case you're still confused, how it is your final survey should look. So she started off this survey with a nice little thank you to her participants for taking the survey, and starts off with some instructions for the demographic questions. So she wrote, below are some questions to learn a little more about you. Please answer them. Please answer to your best of your ability. Then she has her 3 demographics, including the age. You see she just left that open-ended, what year in school, and then what is the participant's gender. So those cover her 3 demographics, which she was then able to associate with her variables. Then she created a matrix of questions using a Likert scale about their current feelings towards their friendship. So she gave, again, a nice set of instructions to please indicate how strongly you agree or disagree with the statements. So these are the 8 that she initially came up with. I'm not sure if that we kept all 8. This is going to depend on our Chromevox Alpha, but this is what participants saw, right? I wonder if my friends actually like me. I feel that I have people in my life I can reach out to. I feel I'm important to my friends, and so on. So she got 8 questions. I believe she was calling this kind of security, friendship security, how confident people felt in their relationships with others and their friendships with others. She did a really nice job coming up with a bunch of different questions that got at friendship security that in a few different ways. So hopefully that played for everybody. Played on my screen. You technically see if we have some technical issues. I could also happily post those videos as examples as well. But really, the point that I talk about in the video is just why this student is following the instructions and what worked well while she was capturing her variable that she was interested in, which was friendship security, and relationship security. So I have a second video here. Again, we'll play a small clip. Hopefully it works. If not, we'll see. It's very brief. But the other reason that I really like making these video instructions is just that it gives me an opportunity to explain why I've assigned a particular assignment, particularly ones that are newly incorporating into a class, which we don't always have time to go over in class. Right? We always only have so much time to fit in all of our content and lectures and feedback, and everything can feel kind of like in a time constraint. And what these videos instructions do is that they let me to kind of talk about the reason I have assigned this. So this is a video instruction for my human lifespan course where students have to create a hypothetical child and then follow them throughout their lifespan. So they kind of talk about their physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional skills all the way from infancy into late adulthood. And so what I do in this video is I start off by just saying, the reason I've started to use these videos is because they, help you with that application of skills. So I'll play a very brief explanation. Again, hopefully it works. We'll see what happens.
I am making this quick video today to go over my expectations and to give you an example of what I'm really looking for in the typical life paper series. This is a new assignment that I just implemented for lifespan development. And since it is new and it is something that you'll be doing throughout the semester, I just wanted to make a video to show you what you should be doing, what you should be thinking about as you write these papers. The reason I created these papers series and took away some emphasis on exams this semester is because I really want you to have more practice applying theories and concepts to milestones rather than just worrying about memorization of topics. I really believe that kind of the more advanced we get with technology and Google and how accessible the internet is nowadays, you're always going to have the opportunity to look up a topic, right? To find that definition, to know what it is that theory of mind is through a quick Google search. What might be a little more difficult as you kind of start your professional careers is actually knowing what that means or what that looks like across the lifespan. And so the point of these papers is to really give you practice actually thinking about what this looks like.
So again, what I think students really like about these videos is that it gives them multiple opportunities to watch over and over again. So just to show how popular they are, you can track your engagement on your Canvas page, how many page views you have. This page where I posted this instruction was watched 429 times, visited 429 times, and viewed 77 times on the first day alone. So out of my class of 30 students, I had some students watching this video 2 or 3 times just to really get a sense of the assignment, instructions, and expectations. And so even though this is not new information that's not available for them in other forms, this might be a modality that they feel particularly comfortable with. So how does this incorporate our UDL principles? One thing that this does, these video instructions, is it really helps to minimize our threats and distractions. And that's, I think, that idea, again, that students feel a lot of anxiety around assignments, particularly like not knowing what to do or what's expected of them. And just by being able to watch these videos multiple times, I think it really helps reduce some of those threatening feelings or anxiety around assignments. It also helps to present information through multiple medias, through visual and auditory information, by allowing students choices, again, with whether it's their self-report variables they're creating for the survey assignment or creating a hypothetical child with their own interests and backgrounds and cultures and experiences. It helps, again, optimize that relevance and value for students. And then the other thing I do for the hypothetical child paper is that it's assessed not just from me, but also through a self and peer review process. And that, I think, really helps students monitor their progress towards their goals. So they're able to see for themselves with the rubric, how do I think I did with this assignment? Or if they really struggled by using a peer review system, they can say, oh, well, this is how it should be done, or this is what worked well on this assignment. I want to incorporate more of that for my own.
So while Amy was going viral creating her videos, I was revising assignment that I use in child and adolescent psychology. So I'm a developmental psychologist, and in my child and adolescent psychology course, I have students do a child and adolescent media analysis. And for this assignment, really the goal is to pick some sort of form of media, so a movie, book, TV show, and they have to describe constancy and change throughout development. And they have to do this from a longitudinal perspective or a cross-sectional perspective. And in their analysis, they have to address the 3 domains of development. So they have to talk about physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional development. I do offer 2 examples, Cheaper by the Dozen and Boyhood. So Cheaper by the Dozen has I believe, 14-person family, and children in the family are between the ages of 5 and 22. So that's a nice cross-sectional analysis. And then Boyhood follows Mason Evan Jr. from infancy through early adulthood. So there's the goal of the assignment. And so like my colleagues, I have reflected on those UDL principles, and I have adopted those in this assignment. So let me talk about some of the changes that I've made. So one of the things that I reflected on when thinking about this assignment was what it means to be an expert and what it means to be a novice or a developing expert or learner. And I really wanted to make sure my instructions were very clear and that my instructions supplied ample information for my students. So I was very explicit. Instead of saying, write a paper analyzing the development of a protagonist in a film, I was very clear in my instructions that it had to be longitudinal or cross-sectional analysis. You had to address themes of constancy and change, and that the analysis needed to include physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional development, right? So as a developmentalist, those things are very obvious to me, but I wanted that to be very explicit to my students. In my assignment, I gave 2 movie recommendations. So I gave that information on the previous slide, and I told students that they could use them. For some, finding a movie or TV show or a book would have been too overwhelming. So in this way, I supplied background information. Some used my recommendations as an analogy, right? It could help them think about films or TV shows or books that they could use. So they didn't have to use my recommendation, right? One of the UDL principles is to offer choice, right? And vary the demands to optimize challenges for our students so they could find their own. Students also had to submit their choice in advance. So before they started their assignment, they had to tell me what TV show, film they were watching or what book they were reading. And I had to give them the go-ahead, the green light. And the reason that I did this was to help with students' planning and strategy development. So I really wanted to help learners be more planful. And one way to do that is to offer cognitive speed bumps, which give learners the opportunity to stop and think. They don't always do this on their own. So by having this teeny tiny assignment, I gave them a sort of cognitive speed bump, right? I almost forced them to stop and think. And there are a few students who, every semester will say they're going to watch a certain movie or watch a certain TV show. And after we talk about it, longitudinal or cross-sectional analysis usually isn't, usually wouldn't be available or feasible. And so they make another choice. And then choice is embedded throughout the assignment. So I mentioned that they can pick a movie or a TV show or a book. So this really optimizes that relevance and value. It also gives students the autonomy, right, to make their own decision. And it permits a more personalization in the assignment. I also vary how students can present what they learn. So this is similar to Kezia's assignment, her counseling paper. Students can write a formal paper. This is how the original assignment was written. But like Kezia, they do other papers where writing is part of the goal. Writing isn't necessarily a central goal of this project. And so if they don't want to write a paper, they can do a podcast or they can create a movie. And so I've actually collected data on this since I've made the change. And so if you notice, this first column has the choice, and the top has this top row has the different assignment components. So as you walk through, you can see no one chose a book. So students are mostly picking movies, a few pick a TV show. In terms of the longitudinal versus cross-sectional approach, fairly even split. More students are not taking my recommendation than taking my recommendation of Cheaper by the Dozen or Boyhood. And then in terms of the style, in general, students are preferring a paper. But there are a few students who like the podcast or video option. And so these are the data across 2 semesters. So I wanted to share that with you in case you're thinking about doing something similar. It's always interesting for me to track this. All right, so I think UDL was especially salient to all of us when we had to make that pivot to virtual learning back in March of 2020. And so we wanted to share with you some of what we'll call COVID considerations were. When we first pivoted to online learning, and even through today, one of the things that I had been particularly worried about, or I thought was a stuck point for my students, was how stress would interfere with their ability to take tests and quizzes. And so we know that everyone benefits from extra time on tests, and I didn't want anyone to have to ask or think that they were getting special permission during a global pandemic. And so all of my tests simply got time and a half as a result. And even to this day, we're still in the middle of that global pandemic. I've made adjustments to how much time students get for my tests. And then I'll turn it over now to Kezia, who will talk about some assignment accommodations she has made.
So one of the main accommodation I made on my tests, given this global pandemic, and again, thinking through the fact that some students are going to speak up and some aren't, and I wanted to make sure that that wasn't, that didn't prohibit someone from having a needed accommodation. I gave all of my kind of work, like daily work assignments for the asynchronous portion of my classes, or the participation that's now on a discussion board instead of what we do in class. That's all got a universal week extension. So there's a due date to help give them that structure of when they should be doing it, but they have up until a week to turn it in and it not be late. And then after that time, because it's just that kind of daily work, it's just not accessible. They can't turn it in after that. That's also reduced the burden on me trying to keep track of all these different things. And if something was late, did that person have a valid excuse? And what counts as a valid excuse might vary a little bit right now too. Some people just, having a roommate who had exposure to COVID, for instance, is very stressful and needing some extra time, and others are caretaking. So just giving that universal accommodation so that people didn't have to feel the pressure to ask.
I also will just say very similar to what Kezia and Catherine have talked about with just providing more time. I've done just with my weekly engagement points for my classes. I typically, would have a very strict, like, you have to be in class to get engagement points policy. But with this semester, and as Kezia mentioned, people have different, reasons for being in class or being virtual or being in person. I didn't want to have to be the person that has to sort through all of that. So I've just given an extension for my in-class engagement points for 2 hours post my class. And if you have other reasons and you need an extension, I'm always kind of happy to provide that. But just rather than it being like at the end of the period, you need to have your assignment or reflection or participation into me, I've just universally said you have 2 hours after class, whatever responsibilities, caregiving, personal, professional responsibilities you have that day, you have that extra time to submit those.
The executive functioning demands of this pandemic have been enormous, to say the least. So we know, right, as psychologists, that stress can interfere with executive functioning, things like self-control and working memory and types of cognitive skills that are needed to do well on tests and assignments. And so one of my courses that I've been reflecting on that has a lot of stuck points is behavioral neuroscience. And so I was thinking about that course and what it's like to take that course during a pandemic. And one of the things that I did was I adjusted my exams. So I have 4 exams in the course. And while it was a little bit of work to shuffle things around, I took those 4 exams and created 5 tests. And while that doesn't seem like a big change, I've noticed a difference. I think that the 5 test model is more accessible for all of my students. And then I think Kezia and Amy have examples as well they'd like to share.
So yes, the executive functioning demand, just the stress and the planning and trying to figure out what's happening. So thinking back to the very beginning when I talked about that counseling professional assignment, that professional exploration assignment, in that class, I typically had 3 assignments, 2 papers and that. And that felt like kind of a lot right now for a lot of students. And again, to make it choice for them, I took those first 2. So one is that professional exploration. The other is using cognitive behavioral therapy, kind of homework and tools, and practicing those, and then writing a reflection, not on their own experience of what they thought about, but their experience of doing it, what it might be like for a client applying the theory to that. And I made that a choice, one of those 2, pick one of those 2. And so it's about probably 2/3 did the professional exploration, which is the earlier assignment. So again, it gave them choice, both when something is due in their semester and what that topic is. And for some students in that class, they're actually not interested in a counseling profession. So the cognitive behavioral theory kind of application paper might make more sense. And then I had one paper comparing different theories that felt essential to the class, and that one is required. So there's now two papers instead of the 3, and they have a little bit more choice in there too, just to decrease that demand. So Amy, I want to pass to you.
Yeah, definitely I agree with this idea of creating more structure, especially as we've pivoted online and students have, expressed all of these confusions about what different models mean, and each professor using different, Canvas differently. And so one of the things that I wanted to be really mindful in creating structure for my class is just sending out weekly reminders and making sure that week to week expectations stay relatively consistent. So for my human lifespan course, for example, students get a weekly reminder on Monday, right? We have classes Mondays and Fridays, like, here's what's due this week. On Mondays, you know that if you have a paper, it's due on Monday. If we have a quiz that week, it's going to be Friday. And so just helping students to really just think about the course as far as, you know, a 16-week journey, but even just into smaller units of week to week, here it is, what you'll need to be planning for and what's coming up, I think hopefully helps students kind of think about each of their, you know, priorities and responsibilities. And then also when it comes to choice, I know that many people, you know, drop the lowest quizzes or allow students to miss assignments that won't hurt their grade. And I think that also helps students kind of plan based on other courses, you know, what they want to complete or not. Oh, and then the last thing also, which I think everyone kind of does, is we all provide, or I know I specifically provide multiple ways to earn engagement points, or what you might call participation points in your class. So that could be actually, you know, making a comment or asking a question in class. That could be writing a reflection or adding to a discussion board during lecture. If you have a comment or question, it could be speaking with a neighbor or partner. And again, just providing a lot of those choices and ways that if a student does have a barrier or an obstacle in one modality, that there's options for them to still get those points regardless of kind of their circumstances.
So I want to talk now just about how you might apply this and invite you to actually do kind of that process that Kate started us out with, thinking on Nelson's process of how you might apply this. So so I have some challenge questions for you, right? So thinking about what are the ways that my students are challenged in my class. Some of those ways are good, right? We do want students to be challenged, but at an appropriate level and not because they just don't understand an assignment or feel lost in that way. So where are the challenges? Where maybe do my students get really stuck or lost, confused? And then thinking about what parts of your course are maybe designed in a single stream. There's only one modality, one forced choice. Where are some places, right, where we might open that up, increase some more freedom, and allow students to kind of explore in different ways. So again, the first part is just reflecting on your class. And maybe that's what you're at today. Maybe that's the place to be. It might be that once you've done that reflection, you're willing to actually start to think about how can I increase flexibility? Where can I increase motivation for my students? Where can I increase that kind of equitable access for all sorts of thinking about that in different ways? Where am I okay being flexible? Like, I think we get pretty stuck. I know I'm speaking for me, maybe I'll just speak for me, but I can get stuck in, oh, this is how I learned, or this is how it's been done. And this is the topics that we've always covered in this class. But why, right? Like thinking about, are you doing those things? Is that single stream? Is that because it's just convention for you? Or is that because it's an essential part of what you want a student to learn in that class? So also then thinking about the goal for all of this whole process is to improve motivation. And I know it's way more fun to read papers and grade papers or watch. See, that's my convention, is I'm so used to reading when I'm assessing, but that isn't the only way to assess. So this semester I've gotten to watch videos and see people present information in new ways. That's kind of fun. And also when they're engaged in the material, that's more engaging for me. They also do a better job, right? So their learning is better and their output tends to be better. We want them to have more on-task behavior. So as Amy said at the, as she was talking about hers, in ways of implementing UDL, sometimes there's some effort up front, but that can really help for the outcome and actually reduce effort going forward in terms of the part of the professor and what we need to do, and not have to answer the same email 5 different times or 10 different times. So these are our challenges to you. Feel free to participate in these challenges, questions in whatever way feels good and comfortable to your own learning and experience. So there's the message board that will be on the chat board. We'll be looking in on and happy to dialogue there. if you want to just reflect by yourself, or if you're watching this with a colleague. And again, wherever you want to be with this. Do you want to think about one assignment and maybe just reflect on it? Great. Do you want to think about one assignment and make a change? Awesome. And maybe you want to kind of think about a whole course or even lots of different things. So starting small is a really good place to like actually make a change and see how that happens. And if one of the ways you want to engage and think about this is to email us, our emails are here. And we just really want to thank you for your time and attention and your interest in helping students learn. Thank you.